The sound of screaming echoed down the narrow, fluorescent-lit hallway. It was sharp, desperate, the kind of sound that made even seasoned officers stop in their tracks. But inside that small-town police station, no one stepped in. No one questioned it. No one cared. Alicia Monroe, just 19 years old, was dragged down the hallway by two officers with blank stares. Her hands were cuffed tightly behind her back, the metal biting into her wrists. Her face was streaked with tears, not from what had happened, but from what was about to. She hadn't committed a crime. All she had done was ask why she was being stopped. She was walking home from the library, wearing a hoodie, earbuds in, and a backpack over her shoulder. Officer Daniel Krell, patrolling alone that night, claimed she looked suspicious. When she asked for clarification, calmly, he accused her of resisting. In moments, she was on the ground, face pressed against the pavement, knees in her back. Her books were scattered in the street, like trash. By the time she arrived at the station, Alicia was exhausted, scared, and confused. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for what came next. Inside the booking room, Officer Krell stood waiting. His face was locked in that smug expression he was known for, one that said, "I do what I want, and nobody stops me." Krell had a long history in that town. Whispers of excessive force, harsh language, and discriminatory behavior followed him like a shadow, but he always walked free, always covered by the badge. He looked Alicia up and down with disgust, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because of what she represented. Young, black, educated, unafraid. And that's when he said it. Cut off her braids. The officers in the room froze. Even the one holding the clippers hesitated. Problem? Krell asked, raising an eyebrow. Those things are a safety risk. She could hide something in them. You want her to choke someone with one of those extensions. The logic made no sense. Alicia wasn't even resisting. She was terrified and trembling. But no one challenged him. Not one officer in the room had the courage, or the decency, to say no. And so the buzzing began. The clippers touched her scalp, and Alicia's body shook. She begged them to stop. She told them those braids had taken hours to do, that her aunt had just done them for her birthday. She told them her scalp was tender, that this wasn't right, that she hadn't even been charged with anything serious. But they kept going. One braid after another fell to the floor, each one a piece of her identity. Alicia could feel the air on her scalp. She felt exposed, violated, like she was being peeled open in front of strangers. And Officer Krell watched, arms folded, satisfied. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything. You're nothing here. Alicia didn't scream anymore. She stopped begging. She just sat still, staring into the distance as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. In that moment, something inside her shifted. She had always been a rule follower, an honor student. She'd been taught that if you did the right thing, the world would treat you right in return. But that night taught her the truth. In a world where power could strip away your dignity in minutes, you had to fight to reclaim it, not with fists, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, ambition. And while Krell walked away that night, convinced he'd taught her a lesson, that he'd put her in her place, he was dead wrong. Because what he did wasn't the end of Alicia's story. It was the beginning. He didn't break her. He built a fire. And one day, he would stand in a courtroom, eyes wide, lips trembling, as that fire stood before him in a black robe and a gavel in hand. But that part? That comes later. Right now, all the world saw was a girl with shorn hair and tear-streaked cheeks. But what they missed, what even she didn't fully understand yet, was that a warrior had just been born. When Alicia Monroe walked out of that police station, she didn't storm the internet with hashtags. She didn't call for protests. She didn't sit down for interviews or speak to cameras. She vanished from the public eye. People around town thought she was just another broken girl, another young black woman chewed up by a crooked system and spat out with nothing but trauma. They whispered about her, how she didn't even sue, didn't go viral, didn't fight back. But they didn't see what was happening behind the silence. Alicia wasn't hiding. She was plotting. She returned to her college dorm room with her head still shaved, her confidence bruised, and her heart on fire. Her roommate tried to comfort her, but Alicia said little. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted transformation. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared into the mirror. Her face looked different. Older, harder, wiser. She reached up and touched her scalp, the smooth surface where her braids used to be. And instead of crying, she did something else. She made a promise. I'm going to make sure no girl ever feels this powerless again. The next day, she walked into the registrar's office and did something nobody expected. She changed her major from journalism to pre-law. For years, she dreamed of telling stories, becoming a reporter, giving people a voice through the media. But now, that wasn't enough. She didn't want to just tell the truth. She wanted to wield it. She gave up late-night parties, group chats, and campus events. While other students posted selfies and danced at homecoming, Alicia was in the law library until closing. She devoured books, civil rights law, criminal justice reform, case after case of wrongful arrests. She wanted to understand the system that had tried to break her, every crack in the foundation, every loophole that let people like Krell walk free. At first, people didn't get it. Professors warned her that law was a grueling path. Friends said she was changing too much. Some accused her of becoming bitter. But she wasn't bitter. She was focused. There was no time for distractions, not when she'd seen how easily a system could flip on someone who looked like her. She remembered the look on Krell's face, the smirk, the satisfaction, the control, and she remembered how the other officers just stood there, silent, complicit. She'd replay that moment in her mind 100 times, and each time, it lit a deeper fire in her soul. Every exam she aced, every internship she applied for, every paper she wrote, it all came from the same place. That humiliation had turned into a mission. And her short natural hair? That wasn't a scar anymore. It was a symbol of what had been taken from her, and what she was taking back. With every inch it grew, so did her resolve. By her senior year, Alicia wasn't just passing, she was leading. First in her class, president of the Black Student Legal Alliance, selected for a national pre-law fellowship. Her professors saw something different in her, a quiet storm, a relentless drive that couldn't be taught. She still didn't talk about what happened at the precinct, not in detail, not even when people asked, but the way she moved said it all. She was no longer the girl they tried to break. She was the woman building herself from the ashes. And while the world forgot her name, Alicia Monroe was building a future where no one could ignore it again. She didn't need revenge. She needed power, and this time, she'd make sure it was hers to keep. Years slipped by like pages in a novel. Alicia Monroe was writing with quiet intensity. While the world spun in chaos, Alicia stayed focused, hungry, and laser-locked on one goal: justice. Real justice. She graduated valedictorian from Howard University, not just top of her class, but with a reputation that echoed through the halls. Professors spoke her name with respect. Students followed her like a rising star. And yet, she never let the attention distract her. Because for Alicia, this wasn't about fame. It was about purpose. While others celebrated with caps and champagne, Alicia packed her bags for the next battle, Harvard Law School. The day she got her acceptance letter, she didn't scream or cry. She just smiled at the mirror, at the reflection of a woman with short curls and eyes that had seen the worst and refused to blink. At Harvard, Alicia didn't just survive. She dominated. She stood out not because she was loud, but because she was unshakable. While other students buckled under pressure, Alicia thrived. Her cold logic, her warm heart, her ability to slice through legal arguments with surgical precision. Professors noticed. Firms took interest. She interned at top law firms, sat in on billion-dollar negotiations, and spent a summer clerking for a federal judge who would later call her the most disciplined legal mind I've encountered in 2 decades. And before her 25th birthday, Alicia Monroe passed the bar on her first try. But she didn't stop there. She fought for civil rights cases. She took on wrongful convictions. She walked into courtrooms where nobody looked like her and made sure they never forgot her name. The courtroom wasn't just a workplace. It was her battlefield. And she never walked in without remembering the first time she was dragged into one, cuffed, violated, humiliated. That memory was fuel. By the time Alicia turned 32, her resume read like something out of a dream. High-profile wins, community impact, and a reputation for absolute integrity. So when her name was floated for a district court judgeship, it wasn't a surprise, except for her age. 32. That would make her the youngest district judge in the state's history. A black woman, once arrested without cause, now being considered for one of the highest legal positions in the region. The nomination shook the establishment. Some people whispered, "She's too young." Others sneered, "She's too radical." But the ones who mattered? They saw greatness. Senators grilled her. Opposing attorneys dug into her past. But Alicia stood firm, calm, and unshakably articulate. Her poise under pressure turned critics into supporters. And finally, after months of anticipation, the Senate confirmed her nomination. Judge Alicia Monroe. Her first day in court was unlike any other. Reporters filled the room. Cameras rolled. Her family sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Law students took notes, and staff whispered as she walked in, the soft click of her heels announcing that something historic was happening. But the moment that nobody expected came when the bailiff announced the first case of the day. A civil misconduct hearing. The defendant, Officer Daniel Krell, the same man who shaved her head, the same man who said she was a safety risk, the same man who smirked as her dignity was stripped away. He walked into the courtroom, aging and visibly nervous. But when he saw who was already seated at the bench, he froze. His face drained of color, because sitting in the judge's seat, in the black robe, with the gavel in hand, was the girl he tried to break, the woman he accidentally built. And now, she held the power. It was a cloudy Monday morning, the kind that hung heavy in the air like something big was about to happen. Raindrops tapped on the courthouse windows, but inside courtroom 3B, the tension was thick and electric. Every seat was filled. Lawyers whispered. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Nobody knew what was coming, but everyone could feel it. At exactly 9 a.m., the double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Judge Alicia Monroe entered. She wore the traditional long black robe, but there was nothing traditional about her presence. Her natural curls crowned her head like armor. Her stride was calm but commanding. She didn't need to raise her voice or bang a gavel. The moment she took the bench, the entire room fell silent. Then came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, confident, entitled. Officer Daniel Krell, still wearing his badge, though not for long. He entered the courtroom with a slight swagger, flanked by his defense attorney. His chest was puffed out, his jaw tight. He adjusted his tie with the same arrogance he'd worn for decades. He was there on disciplinary charges again, this time for violently arresting a Latino teenager during a routine traffic stop. It was the third complaint in 2 years. Internal Affairs had finally had enough. The department was ready to cut him loose, but due process meant he had to appear in court. Krell looked like a man who'd done this before and expected to walk away clean, like he always had. But then, he looked up, and everything stopped. His eyes locked onto the woman seated above him, behind the bench, behind the seal of the state, and under the words, "In God We Trust." Alicia Monroe. At first, his brow furrowed. Confusion. A flicker of recognition. Then realization. His smirk vanished. He blinked, almost like he didn't believe what he was seeing. His posture stiffened. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out, because now he remembered. He remembered the young black girl in the holding cell, the one whose braids were shaved off while he stood by. No, while he ordered it. He remembered her eyes, wide, frightened, filled with rage and sorrow. He remembered thinking she'd be just another statistic, another file, forgotten. But she hadn't been forgotten. She had risen, and now she was staring down at him from the judge's bench, and he was the one under scrutiny. The courtroom didn't know the backstory. They didn't know the layers of history humming beneath the surface, but they could feel the shift, like the air itself had changed. Alicia's expression didn't flinch, not even a blink of recognition. "Court is now in session," she said, her voice smooth, firm, and deeply controlled. Krell's lawyer nudged him, whispering something, but he wasn't listening. He couldn't take his eyes off her. It was like watching a ghost, not one that haunted him, but one that had returned with power. He tried to regain his composure, straightening his tie again, sitting up straight, but it didn't work, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't the predator. He was the prey. As the hearing proceeded, Alicia never once acknowledged their shared past. She didn't need to. Her professionalism was razor-sharp. She listened intently to each side, asked questions with surgical precision, and never raised her voice. But every word she spoke reminded Krell of the massive shift in power that had taken place. She wasn't that terrified girl anymore. She was a force, and she knew exactly how the system worked because she had mastered it. At one point, Krell tried to make eye contact again, as if silently begging for mercy or understanding. But Alicia looked past him, through him, because this wasn't personal. This was justice. The irony was poetic. The man who once made her feel small now sat trembling in a suit, stripped of his arrogance, on the verge of losing everything. And Alicia, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. As the hearing ended, Alicia concluded the session with a calm and measured voice. "This court will review the evidence presented and issue a ruling within the week," she said. "Court is adjourned." She stood, collected her notes, and walked out the way she came in, poised, powerful, and in complete control. Krell remained seated long after the gavel fell. His lawyer had to tap his arm to bring him back to reality, because in that moment, he understood something he never had before. He hadn't just been judged by the court. He had been judged by the woman he tried to destroy, and survived. The courtroom was still, tense, and silent, the kind of silence where everyone holds their breath at the same time. The only sound was the shuffle of papers as Judge Alicia Monroe reviewed the final notes on the case file before her. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the man sitting in the defendant's chair, Officer Daniel Krell. Except now, he wasn't an officer anymore. Not in this courtroom. Not in front of her. Here, he was just a man, stripped of power, stripped of privilege, and now on trial for his actions. He had been accused of excessive force in a racially charged arrest, video footage, witness testimony, and a disciplinary history that painted a pattern of abuse. The prosecution laid it all out clearly. Krell had overstepped again, and this time, the evidence was too strong to sweep under the rug. But still, he sat there, trying to maintain the last shreds of his composure. Then came the moment that shifted the air completely. Judge Monroe spoke. "Mr. Krell," she began, her voice calm, deliberate, but filled with power. "You are here today not as an officer of the law, but as a man accused of breaking it." The entire courtroom seemed to lean in. Krell blinked, his jaw twitching. He recognized her voice now. Deep down, he had already figured it out. But hearing her speak directly to him, hearing those words, crushed the illusion that he was still in control. She continued, "This court does not pass judgment based on race, background, or uniform," she said. "We pass judgment based on evidence, behavior, and truth." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Each word struck like a gavel. And while she never brought up what he did to her, never once mentioned that night the cell, the braids on the floor, everyone in that courtroom could feel it. They saw the contrast. Years ago, he had towered over her while she sat broken. Now she towered over him, seated high above in the black robes of justice, calm and composed, not because she forgot what happened, but because she had transcended it. Krell sat frozen. He couldn't stop sweating. He shifted in his chair. His lawyer whispered something, probably urging him to breathe, but he wasn't listening. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't being protected by the system. He was being held accountable by it. And the person leading that charge? The very woman he tried to erase. Judge Monroe kept her posture dignified. She asked both attorneys tough questions, challenged their arguments with razor-sharp insight, and made sure every detail of the case was clearly understood. She showed no favoritism, no bias, no emotion, because this wasn't personal. This was bigger than personal. This was what justice was supposed to look like, and that's what made it so powerful. She could have used the moment to humiliate him. She could have reminded everyone of what he did to her. She could have destroyed him with her words alone, but she didn't, because revenge wasn't what she came for. She came for redemption, not just hers, but for every person like her who'd been told they were less than. Every black girl who'd been silenced, dismissed, or dehumanized by people like Krell. And in that moment, without ever saying it, she reclaimed what he tried to take. Her power, her voice, her dignity, all while staying exactly what he never expected her to become, the embodiment of the law. The courtroom spectators couldn't look away. Even the bailiff, the stenographer, the attorneys, they felt it. The poetic justice that seemed to hum through the walls. The dramatic symmetry of a once oppressed girl now becoming the one who decides the fate of her oppressor. But still, Alicia Monroe stayed grounded. As this court deliberates, she concluded, it does so with full awareness of the gravity of your actions, Mr. Krell. Your role as a law enforcement officer was meant to protect, not to intimidate, not to escalate, and certainly not to violate. She paused. Not for drama, but for clarity. You will be judged only by the evidence. And by that evidence, we will decide whether justice has been delayed, but no longer denied. Gavel. Tap. Court recessed. Outside the courtroom, the media was already swarming. Rumors had started to swirl about the woman on the bench, her past, her rise, and her silent reckoning. But Alicia didn't speak to them. She walked straight past the cameras, head held high, not needing attention, because her message had already been delivered, loud and clear, from the seat of power. And Daniel Krell? He didn't walk out the same way he came in. The man who once thought himself untouchable had just been stripped bare, not by rage, but by righteousness. And he would never forget the day the girl he thought he broke looked him in the eye and showed him what true justice looks like. The verdict came in on a Thursday morning. Courtroom 3B was packed again, the same faces, the same tension, but this time, the power dynamic had fully shifted. Officer Daniel Krell sat with his lawyer, visibly rattled, waiting for the words that would change the rest of his life. Judge Alicia Monroe entered the courtroom with her usual quiet strength. She didn't need to clear her throat or bang the gavel for silence. The room hushed itself the moment she appeared. She took her seat, opened the folder, and began to read. Based on the presented evidence, the testimony of witnesses, and this court's review of disciplinary history and departmental protocol, she said, her voice calm but crisp. It is the ruling of this court that Mr. Daniel Krell be stripped of his badge, and he is hereby barred from ever serving in any capacity as a law enforcement officer again. Gasps echoed across the room. Krell's attorney buried his face in his hands. Krell himself didn't move. He sat frozen, eyes hollow, mouth slightly agape, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. But the words were real, and they weren't just about the charges he faced that day. They were about a pattern, a culture of unchecked power, of racially motivated force, of impunity finally meeting accountability. For Alicia Monroe, it wasn't a personal victory. It was a systemic shift. She stood and exited the courtroom like always, quietly, respectfully, professionally. But outside those four walls, the world had changed. Because someone in the courtroom that day recognized her. A local reporter, who had covered Krell's earlier misconduct cases, remembered the name Alicia Monroe from years ago, from that one dark chapter so many had tried to forget. He dug through old files. He found it. The arrest report, the mugshot, the 19-year-old girl with tear-streaked cheeks and a shaved head, the same name, the same eyes. And then he tweeted a side-by-side photo, one of Alicia at 19 in the police station mugshot, and one of her now in full judicial robes behind the bench. The caption read, "He shaved her head in a jail cell. Now she sits in the judge's seat, and he stands accused." That tweet exploded. Within minutes, it was shared across the country. Within hours, it was everywhere. Hashtag Judge Monroe began trending globally. People who didn't even know the full story were captivated by the image. A woman who had been publicly humiliated, now publicly holding the gavel of justice. A full-circle moment of strength, grace, and poetic accountability. Talk shows reached out. News outlets wanted interviews. Social justice organizations called her a living embodiment of the phrase, "Still, I rise." Commentators on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram broke down the story like a modern legend. They called her a symbol of quiet revolution, the face of lawful resilience, justice with a natural crown. Memes were made. Art was drawn. A mural of her appeared on a courthouse wall in another state with the words, "We are our ancestors' wildest dreams." But Alicia, she didn't get caught up in it. She didn't do interviews. She didn't write op-eds or accept late-night invitations. She just went back to work. Every morning, she still made her coffee the same way. She still arrived at the courthouse early, reviewed her cases thoroughly, and presided with fairness and dignity. Her staff asked if she'd seen the internet frenzy. She nodded politely and said, "I have work to do." Because that was who Alicia Monroe had always been. She wasn't doing this for applause. She wasn't seeking revenge or even validation. She had always believed that the greatest act of defiance was not in striking back, but in rising above. And she had risen. Still, the world couldn't look away. Students started quoting her in graduation speeches. Law schools invited her to speak to their incoming classes. Black women across the country began sharing their own Judge Monroe moments, quiet battles they had won after being written off, torn down, or underestimated. One viral video featured a young girl, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a homemade judge's robe for career day. Her mother asked, "Who do you want to be when you grow up?" The girl replied proudly, "Judge Monroe." It wasn't about the courtroom anymore. It was about what Alicia now represented, a new archetype of power. Not loud, not angry, not revenge-driven, just deeply, undeniably excellent. And Krell, he disappeared from the public eye after the ruling. Word was, he moved out of state. No one heard from him again, but in many ways, his silence was the final verdict. The man who once roared with unchecked authority now had no voice, no badge, and no more power. And the woman he tried to reduce to nothing? She had become the measure by which justice was now delivered. Weeks after the ruling, Alicia received a handwritten letter at her office. There was no return address, just a neatly folded note inside. "You probably don't remember me, but I was in the cell next to you that night. I heard what they did. I heard you crying. I never thought I'd see you again. I just wanted you to know. I saw the story. I watched the hearing. And I cried again. This time from pride." M.T. Alicia held the letter for a long time. Then, she placed it in her desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a quiet reminder that what had happened to her was never the end of her story. It was the beginning. What Officer Daniel Krell never understood, and what so many like him never do, is that power doesn't come from a badge or a gun. It doesn't come from yelling louder, intimidating more, or abusing the system to assert control. Real power? It comes from purpose, from rising after you've been broken, from building when others try to destroy. And that's the kind of power Alicia Monroe had been cultivating from the moment her braids hit the jail cell floor. While Krell wore his uniform like armor, using it to bully, to dominate, to remind others he was in charge, Alicia built her power silently, brick by brick, book by book, degree by degree. What he thought was just another moment of casual cruelty, another act of humiliation no one would question, turned out to be the spark of something far greater than he could imagine. Because that haircut wasn't the end of Alicia's story. It was the start of a transformation. He took her hair. She took back her future. When the story of Judge Monroe went viral, it wasn't just a feel-good headline. It was a wake-up call. Across the country, thousands of young people, especially young black girls, watched the story unfold and felt something ignite inside them. They saw that yes, injustice is real. Yes, it can break you, humiliate you, strip you down to nothing. But they also saw that it doesn't have to end there. Because Alicia didn't just bounce back, she soared. She didn't scream at the system. She mastered it. Talk shows continued to call. Some wanted drama. Others wanted a tearful retelling of the jail cell moment. But Alicia didn't go on camera to relive trauma. She used her silence as strength. She allowed her story to be told, not through interviews, but through her work, her rulings, her presence. She gave speeches at law schools, not for applause, but to teach, to warn, to inspire. She told one graduating class at Spelman University, "What they take from you doesn't define you. What you build in return, that's your legacy." That quote went viral, too. It was printed on posters, stitched onto hoodies, and painted on murals outside community centers. Judge Monroe had become more than a name. She had become a movement. The message was simple, but it rang out loud across the nation. You can't shave off someone's dignity. You can't handcuff someone's destiny. And you can't silence someone forever, not when they're determined to rise. Young women started applying to law school in record numbers, citing Alicia as their inspiration. Guidance counselors reported students changing their majors to pre-law after watching YouTube videos about her story. And in barbershops, beauty salons, classrooms, and kitchen tables, families talked about her. Not because she was a celebrity, but because she was a mirror. She looked like someone's daughter. She sounded like someone's sister. And she had walked through the fire and came out not just standing, but leading. But the most powerful part of Alicia's story, she never made it about revenge. She could have used her platform to drag Krell through the mud, to humiliate him like he once humiliated her. Instead, she let the facts speak. She let the law work. And that's why it stung so deeply for Krell. Because when he stood in her courtroom, it wasn't just that he had lost power. It was that he now had to watch someone he once tried to silence become the very embodiment of justice. Not angry, not bitter, just undeniably powerful. One clip from the courtroom leaked onto the internet, not from Alicia, but from someone in the gallery. It showed the exact moment Krell realized who was sitting on the bench. His face went pale. His eyes locked on hers. His posture sank. And Alicia, she never even flinched. The clip ended with her voice saying calmly, "Mr. Krell, you are here today not as an officer of the law, but as a man accused of breaking it." That moment, it's now part of Black History TikTok, part of justice reform lectures, part of the cultural memory of a generation. And so, the lesson echoed far beyond that courtroom. It echoed in every community where someone had been dismissed, belittled, or broken by people in power. It echoed in schools, where young girls straightened their backs and remembered that they had more to offer than anyone could see. It echoed in courtrooms across America, as more diverse voices began to rise through the ranks. And it echoed in every conversation where someone said, "You can't do that." And someone else replied, "Watch me." So the next time someone doubts your ability, the next time they try to box you in, the next time they cut you down, remember Alicia Monroe, the girl who was silenced, the woman who stood taller than anyone ever imagined, and the cop who had to watch it all from below the bench.